We have a limited amount of storage on Zoom to give us like a meg.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Secure Hour 2020, Episode 3. For those of us who have joined us before, um, you already know what the series has been like. The first one we spoke about passwords. The second one we spoke about phishing. And tonight we're going to talk about ransomware, the wonderful ransomware. So first of all, what is ransomware? The name kind of says it all, right? Ransom. Ransomware is a form of malware where the hackers or the bad actors, they try to hit your computer with software that will put you in a position that you actually have to pay them in order to get full use of your computer, right? And that can happen in two ways, which we'll speak about later. They can lock up your files by encrypting them or just deny you access to your system. And the only way to, get access or get your files back is to pay them and then hope for the best. Now, the history of ransomware. Ransomware started around 1989. That's when it was first reported, right, with the AIDS Trojan. If you think about this, in 1989, what we're using, floppy disks, right? But yeah, people were actually still trying to, stick them up in the digital world. And the first malware was written by a guy called Joseph. How do you pronounce this? Pop. I'm just short of saying poop, but I'm going to say Joseph Pop. And the way that worked is he had a five and a quarter floppy disk that got sent out to a whole bunch of companies, and on it says like AIDS 2.0. And back then the AIDS virus was still ravaging the world. There was no cure or any proper treatment. So AIDS 2.0. Oh my God, this can't be good. Upon inserting the floppy disk and opening the contents on there, it was basically just a form, right, that you were filling out. But behind the scenes, it was running a script that was not really encrypting your files. What it was doing is it was encrypting the name of the file essentially, and then hiding the files. And Windows have a feature where you can just like show or hide your files, folders, that sort of a thing. So that's what that was doing. So it was pretty easy to crack because they had the decryption key within the actual code itself. However, there were 20,000 infection, right? And if you think about that, that's a lot because you have to basically find a way to distribute a five and a quarter floppy to 20,000 businesses or people. That's some feat. You just think about it. It's 1989. The ransom was actually $189 to be paid to an account in Panama, but that wasn't very, very successful just because it was easy to crack. Today's ransomware are much more sophisticated, right? So how does ransomware work? Well, like I said before in the definition, it's really still a type of malware or Trojan. It's what it does that kind of makes it stand out from, say, a worm, which replicates across your network, right? Or from your regular Trojan horse or a time bomb or something like that. So the steps you would take to protect yourself from any virus is the same thing you would do for ransomware, because at the end of the day, it's still a piece of malware. And what happens, typically, whatever the largest attack surface your organization has, which, in most cases, it's email, the bad actors will try to come in using that method, right? And then trick you into downloading or installing a piece of software that seems to be legitimate. And on the back end, it's encrypting your files. And then eventually, it's gonna deny you access and tell you that you have to pay in order for you to get access to your files. So it doesn't really, you know, work that much different from your typical viruses, except for, you know, what it does for the end result. And then that dovetails nicely into why, you know, why do it. In our very first episode, if you will, we spoke about just how you know, the dark web and malicious actors have an entire economy out there. And you know, it was predicted by 2021-22 that whole economy by itself would be generating $6 trillion. And you know, we made a point to emphasize that today that is essentially the third largest economy in the world, right? Well, why do it falls directly into that, because now it's a really big money-making gig. You know, you steal someone's files, or you lock them out of their computer, and they have to pay you. So now, if you think about, you know, what has happened with some of the most recent ransomware stuff that you've heard about. For those of us in Florida, you heard about the city of Riviera Beach. There was, you know, I think in Chicago. It's just all over the place. And they do it because if you're in a situation as a company, or even as an individual, where, you know, really important information that you have is inaccessible, I mean, that could be your business, essentially. You could literally go to business without having, you know, your data at hand. So it's like, okay, it's a cost of doing business. You know, a lot of companies today are taking out basic ransomware insurance just for that. You know, it's definitely one of the top concerns for CIOs and CSOs and CTOs across the world today. You know, that's how serious this thing is. So the types of ransomware. So there are two main types. There's a crypto and locker, right? The crypto, it encrypts your files and then requires you to pay. And how does that work? Well, it's encryption, right? Encryption was created to kind of obfuscate, you know, information so that only the intended person or party can actually, you know, view or have access to the data in its original form. It's a technique that's being used from, you know, back in the day in during wartime, and as far back as you can go. You know, they've been using encryption techniques. Well, the bad actors today have figured out that if they can actually encrypt your data while they have the key, then, you know, they can demand a ransom. Because at that point, you essentially don't have your data. It's no different from, you know, your entire hard drive, just for argument's sake, getting totally decimated. If you don't have your data, I mean, you would do anything. You would pay any amount of money to get it restored, right? So it's kind of the same thing here. That's how crypto works. It just locks your file and then demand that you pay in order for you to get the key so you can get the files back to the original form. The locker is a little bit different, right? Its main goal is to lock you out of your system. So again, if you cannot log into your computer, you know, that's a big deal. If anyone on here that has a computer, and if you have a business, you know how important that is to you, right? Whether it's just for emailing. You know, most of us, we probably have our passwords, and it's like stored on our computer. You know, all our shortcuts to the various websites and stuff that we use, they're probably just stored on there. And that's, you know, at a very basic level. You talk about a company that's, say, developing software, and, you know, a lot of that information is stored on servers, and that server gets attacked. Again, that could be the end of, you know, that business if they cannot get into the servers, if you cannot get into your computer. So they put you in a position where you cannot gain access to your system, whether it's because the files are unreadable or because you just can't log in, or, you know, you can't access a shared drive or whatever it is. And so the only way you're going to get access to those resources is to pay. So the third thing on this slide, leakware, it's not really, it doesn't really fall under one of the types of ransomware per se, but we have it on here because they will still demand a ransom. What this is, they will steal information from your computer. So you download this application and, you install it and you have dancing cats and, praying dogs and all that good stuff. And on the back end, it's like stealing your documents and stuff like this. When it comes to companies that have really sensitive data, like say a lawyer's office, right? If that happens and they threaten that they're going to release all the information that they stole from your computer, they can demand a ransom. So while it didn't lock you out of your system or encrypted the files, they can still demand a ransom. And so, that's why I kind of want to talk about this, because it's, it's important as well. Most times for, in-home purposes, they will say they have, information about you watching porn, or, they got access to your camera and they have a video of you doing, personal stuff in your home, and they'll threaten to release that information unless you pay them, right? If you care, you might want to pay. If you don't care, then, you could be like, all guys do that. Okay. So with that being said, I am going to hand it over to Tori.
Okay, so George, thank you for the very in-depth breakdown of ransomware. As George said previously, people may think ransomware has only been around for maybe 5-10 years, but it's actually been around over 30. Started way back in the day with floppy disks. The WHO, the World Health Organization, was targeted, and it's been off and on ever since. As you can see from the timeline, there was a little bit of a break there between 89 and 2005. But then ransomware started to come back. The threat actors began to change their approach, and started to look at really infecting file types, right? So instead of just going after the entire computer, possibly making the computer unusable, more of a locker type approach, they started to actually attack the files, and they saw the importance of that, and so they would take the files, lock those, and then send you some type of notification saying, hey, if you want these files unlocked, you're gonna have to pay, but you can still actually, the computer is still functional for the most part. Then from 2005 on to about 2013, off and on, you'd have, different instances of ransomware popping up. But really in 2013 is where you had what we call the revolution of ransomware, just really where it began to explode, and all these different iterations of ransomware began to pop up. Around that time, this thing called cryptocurrency was really starting to take off, and different versions of the cryptocurrency were coming out, and the bad actors realized, hey, we can start using cryptocurrency to try to get ransomware because it can't be tracked. And so this became the primary form of ransomware. Ransoms being paid through ransomware, and it just exploded. And from there, you started seeing all different types of ransomware. From 2013 to 2014, and then after 2014, the threat actors started realizing, hey, we can attack more than just PCs. Of course, Windows PCs to this day remains the primary shareholder of technology outside of mobile devices for the most part. But where the threat actors started to realize is we can attack more, we can target more than just Windows machines. More and more people are having mobile devices. IoT was beginning to become a thing. Mac was getting more market share. Linux was getting more market share. So they began to attack all these different vectors. And then on top of that, they then started realizing, hey, we can turn this into a service. Not only can we attack people individually, but we can create a solution that we can sell to other bad actors or threat actors for them to then take our solution, pay us a subscription fee, and go attack whoever they want to attack. So now it's not even about us attacking. We're not in the business of attacking anymore. We're in the business of writing ransomware as a service, and selling that to other bad actors. So, when George was talking about the economy just really booming, you started seeing this was a part of it. Like bad actors really started seeing the business side of things and really using their ingenuity to come up with ways to generate revenue without having to be the ones doing the work, as far as attacking whoever and trying to obtain their data. You started seeing nation state attacks, right? So now it ain't even about the bad guys, the little, the little script kiddies or the little anonymous hackers or whoever the case may be. You've got actual states, actual nations attacking each other through this form. So this became, ransomware just exploded at this point. And in the process of that, because again, in its natural form, ransomware is, hey, I've got something that's a value of yours. If you want it back, you need to pay me. And then of course it's a 50-50 shot, right? You pay the ransom, there's no guarantee you're gonna get that data back. Well, a lot of people was like, no, we're not gonna pay the ransoms. So they either went to backups and just took a loss on, how old the backups may be. So their recovery point objective, the RPO, could be a day behind, an hour behind, whatever the case may be. They lost data, but that's better than paying the ransom and losing all their data, right? So a lot of people stopped paying. So then, the ransomware gurus realized, hey, wait a minute. We can not only encrypt the files, but we can start exfiltrating them. We can take them, right? And so what we'll do is we'll take them and we'll threaten you. Not only if you don't pay, you won't get them back, but then we'll release them. And then that became more of a concern to people being attacked than the actual files themselves, right? So if I have intellectual property and you've encrypted it, I've got a backup of it, that's fine. I won't pay the ransom. But if there's a threat of you releasing that to somebody else and now someone else rushes to market with my intellectual property, now you got my attention because I can't really combat that. So there's been somewhat of a shift with the ransomware to where people have to where the threat actors, the bad actors, the bad guys, the malicious actors, they've now begun to focus more on, hey, look, if you don't pay this ransom, we're going to release this information. And that really puts people in a bind because what can you do in that situation? You have to pay the ransom if you don't want them to release it and then hope they don't release it, right? So ransomware has begun to evolve somewhat. What you have here is some of the more modern versions of ransomware, past 2016. Kerber is actually ransomware as a service, but it continues. The bottom line is ransomware continues to be one of the most lucrative and dangerous forms of malicious software, simply because it's not about destroying your computer. It's about what's most important, and that's your data. Data is the new gold, as most people know. And so if I can get a hold of your data and I can hold it ransom, or I can threaten to release it, I'm in a better position to get whatever I want from you. And, initially ransomware ransoms were, 5 figures. We're talking about multi-millions of dollars now, where the ransom is a multi-million-dollar figure, because of how important this data is, especially with the threat of it being released. So again, just impacts of ransomware, right? As you can see, there's a list here of different countries. Again, we've got to be number one in everything we do, right? We're number one in COVID. We got to be number one in ransomware. Like whatever it is about America, we are number one. Okay, you either go big or go home in everything, good, bad, or ugly. So as you can see, $9 billion in ransomware, over almost 25,000 submissions. It's big business. It's big business, and and it's not going away anytime soon, because it's something that a lot of businesses are still susceptible to. I think what was it, George? Recently, a few major companies, Canon, some other company, a few other companies got hit. Like big brands are getting hit, and that's a scary thing, because if you think about it, the bigger the brand, ideally, the more security you have in place, the more security experts you have in place, but that doesn't stop you from getting compromised. So definitely brands are being destroyed, reputations are being destroyed, and billions of dollars are being given up in order to, hopefully get that information back. It's big business, right? So what George is going to jump into right here is he's going to jump into a demo. Again, it's a very, very basic demo just to kind of show you. Once the ransomware gets on your machine, and there's various ways that it can't get on your machine, from phishing being a major way of ransomware getting on your machine, or you fat fingering a web address and going to the wrong website that kind of looks like the website you're trying to go to, but then you realize you're not there, and by the time you've already gone there, your machine has been compromised because they've already begun to download the software. Or even legitimate websites, if they're not closely paying attention to what's going on with their sites and monitoring their sites, malicious actors have found ways to put code on their sites and keep it kind of anonymous. So if you go to ESPN.com or CNN.com, right, you could end up downloading ransomware and not even know it because you're at a legitimate website, because these companies, again, aren't paying the closest attention to their websites and ensuring the security is in place so that these threat actors can't come along and just insert code into their website.
All right, so this is going to be very short. Again, it's just to kind of illustrate the concept behind ransomware, and this one was focused on the locker type. So enjoy.
I have my important work data. So you can imagine this might be your shared drive with all your corporate information on. Open one of these files just to prove it's a real Excel spreadsheet. You can see profit and loss projections, revenues, cost of sales, expenses, etc. Now, the normal attack vector is an email with an attachment, is an attachment pretending to be a report of some kind, an annual report. If we fire open this proposed annual report, what's actually happening in the background is the virus is downloading, and it's currently encrypting all of my data in the background. Once the data is fully encrypted, it fires open a ransom note. So the ransom note effectively tells you that all of your data is now encrypted, and if you want to decrypt the data, you need to follow the links, pay a ransom, and you should get access to your data again. The challenge here is you can see that we have no access to data. What were Excel spreadsheets are now incomprehensible encrypted files that we have no access to. And the challenge with paying a ransom is that I've heard reports that not everyone that pays a ransom gets access to a decryptor. Your money's lost to the attackers and you still have data you can't use. The trick here is to not open attachments that you don't trust. Never open an attachment from someone you don't know. Never open an attachment you're not expecting.
Let me jump in here for a second, George.
Okay.
So the funny thing about this video is anybody who's dealt with file types sort of automatically saw that file was problematic. It wasn't a traditional Microsoft Office or PDF or anything. So the sad thing is people do that all the time. People will see the name of a file and they'll just click on it, right? That was a VBS script. Like nobody in their right mind should ever click on a VBS script. That's an attachment in their email. But people do that all the time because they'll just see the name and they don't know any better and they'll just double click. And so that's, obviously threat actors have become more clever in trying to make sure whatever attachment is they want you to click on looks like a legitimate attachment. PDFs have become a huge vector for payloads, malicious software payloads, but something like that, a terrible setup. And I watched a webinar the other day, and someone did a terrible job of crafting a Microsoft Word document. It was horrible looking, right? But even inside of it, there was links and the person clicked on the link and then, you know, they got compromised. So, you know, it just goes to show you, and here's, you know, George's going to jump into countermeasures, but it just goes to show you that people really need education, because they will just click on whatever and not even like stop and pay attention to see if it even looks legit.
Right. So again, malware is, you know, it's not magic. I'm sorry, ransomware, it's not magic, right? It's just another form of malware. So, you know, we've always encouraged businesses and individuals to ensure that you have an antivirus software, right? Best practices when handling emails. You know, don't click on links unless you're 2000% sure that's legitimate. But the best thing to do is actually to, you know, just go directly to the website that the link is referencing, and then try to do whatever it is they're telling you to do in the email. You know, we spoke about that in or phishing episode. And so again, it's the same kind of countermeasures that you need to, you know, that you need to apply. Your biggest line of defense is going to be your employees, right? It's going to be you, because at the end of the day, the ransomware, you know, software isn't magically just appearing on your computer, right? All they're trying to do is trick you into putting it on there. So you have to be really vigilant about how you handle everything that comes from the internet, right? If you get a USB drive, you know, from someone you don't trust or you don't know, you have to be very careful with stuff like that, even though, you know, that attack vector is not as big, just because, you know, most people spend time on the internet, right? And we just love to click. So, you know, that's why using links are so popular. So, you know, from a business perspective, you have to ensure that you have an email security platform. And by that, I'm talking about, you know, stuff like a Proofpoint, or even, you know, using what's provided in Office 365 or Microsoft 365 email services. You know, that way you're looking for emails that look like spam, you know, email that are coming from, you know, weird addresses where the email address doesn't actually match the email address from the server, and, you know, setting up DKIM and all of that kind of stuff. That's one of the things you definitely should do. You have to edify your employees. You have to edify yourself, right, in how to handle and do these things. So I thought, I'm sorry, give me a sec. I gotta let someone in. All right. Yeah. So you have to edify yourselves and edify, you know, your employees, because at the end of the day, your defense is going to be as strong as the weakest link. And if you have people in your organization that aren't practicing, you know, using security best practices, it doesn't matter how much defensive mechanism you have set up, you're still going to get breached. Use techniques like two-factor authentication, you know, because at the end of the day, again, if you have, say, an email account and you don't have two-factor authentication on it, and someone gets into your email account, then they can use that to send emails to others in your organization that look legitimate, right? And it then makes it easier for them to get access to everyone in your company. We just spoke about trusting emails from people you know. Well, if you get an email from someone you know, you're more likely to click on the link, right? So you have to protect all of your assets, including email, including your, you know, your computers, including websites, including your SaaS offerings. You have to protect those as best you can. And, you know, two-factor authentication right now is definitely one of the ways to go about enhancing that. You know, you should create an email usage policy for your company. You know, what we just spoke about, using two-factor authentication, you kind of want to wrap that up in a policy so that all your employees know and understand what is expected of them while, you know, handling email in the organization. You should work as much as you can to reduce the amount of public facing assets that you have. So, don't just leave your servers open to the general internet just because. You always want to try and ensure that you only have things accessible from the internet that you absolutely need to, like your web servers. Never have your database accessible from the internet. Those are just best practices. One of the things that's really taking off today as it regards to fighting ransomware is EDR, right? Endpoint detection and response. And unlike your traditional antivirus software, which operates by using signatures, right? So it can only really fight against stuff that is known, because the signature has to be created from the virus that they found. So zero-day attacks always tend to get around your traditional antivirus software. Why? Because it don't know about it yet. So if you're one of the first people to get hit by a zero-day attack and you have, just your traditional Norton antivirus, you're going to get hacked. There is no two ways about it. But now with endpoint detection and response, these applications are like, version 4.0 of your traditional antivirus. They're using heuristics, they're using intelligence from the cloud, right? They're gathering data from all the clients that are using their platform, and you're kind of looking at patterns that are evolving and occurring and making decisions before stuff actually happens. So they can tell just based on how a system is behaving on the network that this looks suspicious. We're going to remove it and, investigate, or this is definitely a virus activity, but it's just brand new. So even though there's no signature for it, they can actually tell that it's malware of some type, including ransomware. And the R in EDR for response is that they can take action, right? So instead of just sending an alert or whatnot to a sysadmin, they will actually do what's needed to either remove the malware threat or to remove the asset from the network.
So, in closing, thanks, George. George actually handled my part. Hot mess. So, let you know how prepared I was. In closing, phishing continues to be one of the major ways businesses get compromised by ransomware. It's not the only way, as I spoke about previously, but it is one of the major ways because, again, people just click on emails, they click on links, they click on attachments. Doesn't matter what the attachment looks like. Doesn't matter how bad crafted the document is. They'll click on it and just, next thing you know, they're compromised. So how you combat that? Being that the weakest link in technology now is mankind, is education. That's why it's so important that awareness is preached through businesses. It's a part of the fabric of companies. Security awareness is something that is actually a benefit to every employee, because not only does it protect the business, it actually can protect the employee personally, so that their own personal stuff doesn't get compromised. Whatever you're doing, whatever company you're working for, if you're a business owner or if you're an employee, I would encourage you to ensure that there's some type of security awareness training program in place and that it's being done consistently. A lot of places, they'll do security awareness training, when you first get hired on, and that's it. Or they'll do it maybe once a year because they're required to do it by some type of compliance organization. But really, this should be a continuous thing because these attacks are constantly changing. And so awareness needs to be more frequently than annually or when you first get hired on. So again, don't click on links or attachments in emails until you fully vetted the legitimacy of the email and the sender. It's simple as, if Justin sends you something and you weren't expecting something from Justin, pick up the phone and call him, be like, hey man, did you send this? Confirm. One of the other things you can do is if you get an email with a link talking about, hey, you need to reset your password or whatever the case may be, go type in the address to whatever application that is. Don't just click on the link. If it's Wells Fargo, whatever the case may be, go type in wellsfargo.com. Don't click on the link that's in the email. And the next thing you know, you're at what looks like a Wells Fargo website, but you're essentially giving your information to the bad guys. So some other things that can be done as well to help protect a non-email risk is make sure your company make sure your company's protecting the internet access. And there's different ways of doing that. Defense and layers. One of the major ways is using a DNS security / web filtering type of solution that is monitoring, all those fat fingers that are happening, right? So that if you do fat finger a URL or a web address, it blocks it because it knows you're going to a malicious site that could compromise the machine. So make sure you're using that. Also, what these DNS web filtering solutions does is that provides visibility to the company, so they know exactly where their employees are trying to go. They can see what their companies are trying to do, and again, that could be another opportunity for training and making sure that these companies are aware of these things and that they're only going to company-approved websites. Run periodical mock phishing campaigns. So a phishing campaign is something that a company can do to simulate phishing attacks. You can put a campaign together within your company using a third-party company, and you can do periodical campaigns within your own business to see how your company's doing. And if they click on the link, instead of them actually getting compromised, they'll get a pop-up window saying, hey, look, you've been identified as someone who needs some education. So you'll be contacted to be educated. But what that does, that lets the company know that, hey, we do have people that just don't quite grasp, how important phishing is and how important it is to protect themselves when it comes to emails and how they handle emails. And therefore, there's opportunities to, once again, get them in security awareness training. Last but not least, well, not last but not least, but second to last, ensure that you have a working backup of your data that's not accessible from your network or cannot be overwritten. One of the great things about technology evolving is, cloud computing is now providing you opportunities to keep your data somewhere else, including backups, which provides an added layer of security so that, if your network does get compromised and the bad guy is able to move around, and if your backups are on your network, then the bad guy could potentially find your backups, encrypt them as well. So now your backups are just as worthless as the files that got encrypted. But if you keep your backups, off-site in a cloud solution or some other hosting place, then that makes it more difficult for the bad guys to encrypt the backups. Of course, once again, the downside is you're going to lose data because unless your backups are being done real time of some sort, there's going to be a point. Again, we call it a recovery point objective, an RPO. There's going to be a point of data that's going to be lost. And that's just, that's the cost of dealing with this, unless you can afford a real-time backup strategy that is offsite, that is protecting you, that can't be compromised by the bad guys if they get on your network and start wreaking havoc. Last but not least, get insurance, right? A lot of companies, their business continuity plan is, hey, if we get compromised, we have an insurance plan. They have cybersecurity policies now. You can get those through possibly, your PNC or whoever you deal with for your business insurance. Look at getting one of those that can protect you, so that, if you do have to end up paying the ransom, whatever the case may be, hopefully you can be reimbursed for it, and you don't take a huge impact financially for trying to recover files that are critical. With that said, the floor is open. We always encourage everybody that comes to join us to participate, to ask questions. It doesn't have to be about the particular topic. It can be about security in general. But we always want to open up the floor for any questions there may be or any comments, and just really have more of a shared dialogue. So.
Well, thank you so much for the information so far, guys, first and foremost.
You're welcome, Ashley. Just don't click on links.
Yeah, that's something I keep trying to tell my grandfather. He doesn't seem to understand. He's like, what are links for if you're not supposed to click on them? And I'm like, again, with the clicking on things and then wondering why your computer doesn't work because it's full of malware. Ugh.
One thing I'll toss in with regards to backups, there are these types of backups nowadays. They're immutable, right? They're not read only. It's like a new state almost, right? You have write, you have read, and now it's like immutable. And what it really is, it's a write once. So once the file is created, you can't write to it again. You can't overwrite it. You can't modify it. There's nothing you can do to it. So that's another form of backup you can use to help to protect against, ransomware taking over your backups by actually encrypting them. Because to encrypt it, you actually have to, rewrite the file. That's what it is. It's scrambled data using a particle algorithm tied to a specific key that's actually obfuscating the data, right? So that's another type of backup that you can use as an organization, or if you want as an individual. But that's another type of backup that you can use to help protect your data.
We had a question from Trisha, talking about there appears to be more and more phishing scams via text and SMS as opposed to traditional email. What are we seeing trends with that? So, the other thing with that, Trisha, is yes, malicious actors are attacking mobile devices more and more, iOS, Android devices, but there's still some inherent security built into mobile devices in the sense that apps have to be installed, and a lot of times, they still have to come through like the store. So there is some structure there, as opposed to a Windows machine, a Linux machine, a Mac machine, where you can just go click on a link and automatically it's downloading stuff and doesn't have to install anything. You can just run in memory. You can just, it can just start to wreak havoc without having to actually be an application on your device. Mobile devices still tend to be more, you need an app installed in order for that app to wreak havoc. So it is becoming more and more of a threat, but it's still not as lucrative as PCs, and those type of endpoints, because of how easy it is for malicious software and ransomware to get on those devices and then to jump around, right? So, I have my iPhone here. I click on a text. I get, potentially compromised. There's really not much more for the malicious actor to go for outside of getting my data, right? Whatever data is on my machine, whatever data is on my phone. But if I'm on my PC, at a Zens office and I get compromised, now I can start jumping around between PC to PC, go hit a server, and I have access to a lot more resources that I can compromise as opposed to mobile devices. So, I would say in short, and obviously George can chime in, it is another vector for attacking, but it's not as it's not as attractive for bad actors or for bad guys, because at the end of the day, the amount of what it's worth to go through the hurdles of getting malicious code on a mobile device, the reward just isn't quite there.
Right. So, Justin, for some reason I thought it was Justin, had a question. Are you familiar with the Huntress Labs and their offering? If so, what do you think of the sort of product to supplement standard endpoint protection solutions? Worth it? I was not familiar with Huntress Labs per se, but I'm familiar with the concept. It's threat hunting. And, that's one of the tools we're seeing evolving to fight against ransomware. Because the problem with ransomware is, the way they typically come in as Trojans, right? And you will download like legitimate software and it's attached to it, right? Or the code is actually embedded within, let's say, you love to go on Kick-Ass Torrents or Pirate Bay or whatever and download software, and you download, Adobe Acrobat or Keygen, and it actually works, but as a part of that file, there is a piece of malware inside there. And what they're doing now is they are making it so that these applications, when downloaded, they literally don't do anything by themselves, right? So they then call home to a server on the internet, which then sends the payload with the actual virus inside there, basically, right? Which will handle the encrypting and sends like the public key to actually do the encryption and all that kind of stuff. So one of the best things you can do is look at patterns and see kind of what's going on, what's looking suspicious on a particular device endpoint on your network, and then try to either investigate or to stop it. So I think these tools are definitely worth investing in for companies that can actually do it. I think it's the new way of fighting against ransomware. And it's just kind of the beginning. They're all using a lot of AI, and everyone seems to have like a dedicated team towards threat hunting. And they all tell you they're scouring the dark web and looking for patterns and what they're talking about on there, and then trying to implement algorithms in their technologies that can actually detect those behaviors, because that's what they're doing now. It's just all behaviors before it actually happens. So yeah, it's I think it's definitely worth it to invest in these type of technologies. And
so I have a quick follow-up question. So these guys in particular, I had a conversation with them a couple weeks ago, and because we're thinking about kind of augmenting our kind of security stack with these guys as well. And they seem to play nice with other endpoint solutions, so we're not super worried about that. But we're I guess my concern is apparently it's a heavily manual process. So they don't automatically quarantine or remediate. They basically detect something and they shoot us a notification saying, hey, we detected something. Here's our recommendation for remediation. And they do have a basically a button that you can click that says, remediate, but it requires human intervention. They're saying they don't want to fully automate the process because that remediation could potentially be disruptive.
Positives, right? So what I can tell you, because the model seems to be the same for most of these companies, the really big one in the EDR space is CrowdStrike. Carbon Black is really big in there too, and there are a few others, but CrowdStrike is actually the biggest player in that space. And the way they do it is they have different tiers, and this is not in promoting CrowdStrike, but we've had some conversations with them and understand exactly how they work.
Sounds like a promotion, George. Sounds a little bit like you're plugging something, bro.
Stop recording. So the difference between like what they're offering and Huntress Labs is they have remediation teams, right? And they will actually remediate. It's like a different tier though, and you'd have to pay for it. But they actually have people that are manually doing that. And I do believe they have an automated process too, where you can set it up to take certain actions for certain behaviors. So my advice to you is to probably look around a bit more before settling with these guys, and just make sure that whomever you choose is actually doing exactly what you want, because the space is getting very convoluted right now. There's a lot of players in that space. So just take a look at the latest Magic Quadrant and pick out the top 3 or 5 and see what they're offering.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and also to piggyback on that, Justin, look at a solution. And again, I'm not familiar with Huntress Labs, but there's a lot of threat hunting solutions that have the ability to integrate with an existing EDR or an existing EPP, so that the threat hunters themselves, the threat hunting solution itself, may not be able to remediate directly. It can do the remediation through an integration with one of these other solutions. So I mean, it can still be done, right? On top of the fact that a lot of these threat huntings they're automating it, they're using AI, like George said, but at the end of the day, it's detection. At the end of the day, all they can do is they can go out, they can find these rogue devices on your network. They can find, abnormal behavior on this endpoint, but they can't stop. All they can do is alert. However, through the integration, that's where they can now they've been empowered to actually stop the attack. So that's something else you want to look at as well. So that manual intervention part, or that manual process of, hey, Soaring Tech, you got these threats, go do something. That integration allows them to actually do something right then and there. And again, that can even be automated, right? Through the integration. Okay, well, if you identify this, kill the NIC, right? Or whatever the case may be, especially in a virtual environment, right? You have a lot more flexibility in virtual environment with virtual machines, but even physical machines, if there's an agent, if there's an EDR agent or an endpoint protection agent sitting on that physical device, the integration can come through the agent and tell the agent to remediate immediately. And now you actually have an actionable plan happening, as opposed to a manual intervention coming in from Soaring Tech or somebody else.
Right. So I mean, and that's one of the concerns, right? Is that if it's not automatic, there's going to be some lag time between, right, when we get the remediation instructions and when somebody presses the button to remediate, right? And exactly. I'm simplifying it, obviously, but at the end of the day, if ransomware has, I mean, if there's something that gets a foothold, there's a certain amount of time you have before you can remediate before it's too late, right? And so how long, I guess the question is on average, what do you guys see in terms of, and this may be a tricky question to answer, but what do you guys see in terms of the amount of time that it takes for, between infection, initial foothold or initial infection to, it's kind of too late, your shit's encrypted?
If you get hit with ransomware, you're already in trouble. Because one of the first things they do is they try to disable your, whether it's endpoint protection or antivirus solution or whatnot, right? And so that's why these solutions are supposed to be, well, kind of the answer, because they're supposed to stop it before it starts happening. Because once it happens, you're already in trouble, So I think it sounds like what they're offering is endpoint, detection, and not necessarily prevention or any kind of any kind of response. Sending an alert and telling you that you have a ransomware problem, it's already too late. I promise you that. It's literally too late. If I'm not mistaken, it's, what do they say? You have approximately 3 minutes, and then it's too late.
Right.
Yeah. So at that point, it's really just about trying to stop it from getting even worse, right? Trying to limit the impact at that point. I mean, you've already been impacted, but how do you stop it from getting worse? So, because again, that software is going to get there. It's going to find this data. It's going to encrypt it, but then it's going to keep searching. There's a lot of ransomware out there that will sit there on your machine and just watch, and doesn't do anything immediately. So then how do you quantify that, right? It could be sitting there for a week just monitoring, and then eventually decides to, it sees, oh, okay, there's some data over here. There's some data over there. Okay, I see finance going over here. I see marketing going over there. I see IT going all over the place. Now I know all these different places that there's data. Now it's time to attack. So it's really hard to quantify that. But ultimately, like George said, the sooner, you have something that detects it and identifies it, and can begin the remediation process, the better chance you have of reducing the damage. And again, that integration is where it's really going to be key, because that takes out, the lag time between the alert getting to your team and then your team acting.
Another thing too, Justin, is, what we're talking about is protecting the endpoint, right? Prior to getting to the endpoint, the payload has to traverse the network. It has to go through all the network components and whatnot. Then your endpoint solutions don't really protect your network gear, at least none that I know of. They all, they all tend to be installed on Windows or Mac or something like that. But adding another layer of protection on the network side can also help, right? Because that's before it gets to any of your endpoint, and ultimately that's what you're trying to do. So it's security in in-depth. It's a security in-depth approach, right? You protect network, you know, having network detection and response just like you would on the endpoint, and you do that on the endpoint as well. So, you know, it's if something do get past the network track, then it has to, you know, deal with the endpoint solution as well, which is going to, you know, make your entire organization a bit more secure.
Right, and we do the network layer. You know, we do a combination of you know, firewall and DNS layer stuff. So without getting too much into detail, we you know, we're trying to stop. We have a couple of different layers before it hits the device that hopefully will stop it. But once it hits the device, you know, we're thinking essentially how many different agents or solutions on the device does it make sense? You know, you're going to get diminishing returns the more crap you throw on there, and you're going to slow the damn thing down. So you want to, you know, put enough on there that it makes sense, but no more.
Right. And that's where, you know, that's where some of these solutions, these next gen endpoint protection solutions have EDR built into it. So it's not separate agents. You know, it's not putting more of a load on the performance. They're just taking the existing agent that's always been there, and they're making it more optimal, more efficient, and building in more security. You know, the great thing about EDR is it's monitoring behavior, like George said, and it's monitoring like what's coming and going on the device, right? So, you know, the endpoint protection portion of it could completely miss it. But once the behavior starts, like it starts snooping, it starts trying to do its little discovery, reconnaissance, that's where the EDR can be like, oh, wait a minute, this is some strange behavior coming from Justice Machine, and then, you know, alert, right? Or there could be automated controls built in to where it says, okay, well, based off this behavior, kill the NIC, right? And yeah, that's extreme, but, you know, sometimes that's what it takes to stop that first hop over to your file server or over to this app server where it's trying to encrypt, you know, back-end DBs and take down your enterprise application. So that's I mean, it's always going to be a trade-off, right? Security and convenience, but they are trying to make the agents more resilient, more optimal, so that they take up less computing resources, but can provide even better, you know, security.
So do you have a particular endpoint solution that you think is worth looking at, or a few of them that are worth looking at that are bundling the CDR and other kind of more advanced mitigation approaches?
I mean, I don't, but apparently George does. So we'll go ahead and let George answer that question.
No, like I said, CrowdStrike is definitely the leader in that space. Someone said to me, you know, CrowdStrike is like the S-class, and everybody else is like you know, a C-class.
Bro, are you trying to use anime? Are you trying to use anime references right now, man?
Yeah. So
no.
Apparently they're just like way ahead of everybody else. So I would definitely say look into CrowdStrike. I know Carbon Black, they're pretty solid. They're pretty solid as well.
Cool.
All right.
I've got nothing, George.
You got nothing, Dustin?
Got nothing. I use Carbon Black for some of the agencies that I work with, but that's about it.
It's too bad we don't have Cody on. We could ask Cody what he uses for his you know, his MSP offerings. But
Norton 360.
No, Norton 360. Hey man, look, Symantec makes some. I mean, Symantic's still up there in the in those quadrants and those Forrester waves and those whatevers. But yeah, the main thing is the main thing is defense and layers, right? It's defense and depth, right? It's all about layers. So having a combination, right? Having a combination of endpoint protection, EDR. You know, there's this new thing called NDR, which is really just repackaging of network traffic analysis. You know, you have your IPSs. You have so at the end of the day, it's the more security solutions you have in place, the more layers, the more visibility you're going to have, right? The east-west visibility is arguably the worst visibility in any on any local area network. right? We can sit there and watch north-south traffic, internet traffic all day. But when it comes to George talking to Dustin or Justin talking to Trishan or Jillian talking to me, like that traffic, we don't have the same type of visibility. And especially if it's on the same network segment, the same VLAN, or in the virtual world, it's on the same host, that's where you start to lose that visibility. And if something happens, trying to, the whole kill chain thing, right? Trying to understand how the kill chain went down breaks down. And that's where if you have multiple layers, you have EDR that can tie into, and you have multiple layers and you have integration. Then what you do is you start to build an ecosystem where the EDR can see, the IPS saw something and sent it to the SIM, or it sends it to the EDR. The EDR is sending traffic, sending something over to the NTA, and they're all starting to communicate and build this visibility so that, now you can come in and you can actually see what's happening and hopefully be able to jump on it a lot quicker. I mean, there's malicious software that, as you know, Justin, that's been sitting in people's environments for months, and that's by design. People don't even know. People don't even know they have malicious software sitting in their environment just watching. It's literally just sitting there watching, right? Recording, whatever the case may be. And then they pick and choose their time through a CNC, through CNC capabilities. And then now it's game over. But yeah, so it's hard to really, put times around it. But the bottom line is, defense in depth, right? Multiple layers, and then trying to build a security ecosystem where all your security solutions kind of talk to each other, and that way they can really alert each other, and they can really build a big picture for you as far as what's going on in your environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a balance of like how, we already have a bunch of layers. I'm going to be a little cagey about details on that, but we have a bunch of layers in place already. And it's just, I'm trying to strike a balance of like, what do we, how much do we want to invest in migrating to maybe a different solution, or kind of augmenting our current stack, or, whatever. It's a tricky thing. And there's not like there's no silver. I think as all these security companies seem to be coming out trying to build some kind of unified solution, but it's a real hodgepodge. You have to find like the right solution for this layer, then this layer, then this layer, then this layer. It's like 27 different things you got to figure out before you can't just sign up for a service, right?
Have you done like a formal risk assessment?
Yeah, so we've had third-party auditors come in and take a look at what we're doing, and we've had let's say, for our size, much better than average ratings. They were actually pretty happy to see that. One of the guys he's former NSA guy, so I feel like he kind of knew what he was talking about. But at the same time, we're also not no MSP is bulletproof, and it's really it's one of those things that if you get that assessment done at whatever point in time, down the road, that's going to become irrelevant. And so you got to stay ahead of the curve. I think security, it's always kind of like outrunning the bear, right? Like how much outrunning the bear do you need to do versus, I mean, I don't know, maybe you just get an audit every 6 months. I mean, I don't know. What do you recommend? I mean, do you think you need like for an MSP, I mean, any MSP, how often should they have a third party evaluate what they're doing, see if they're up on the latest and greatest and all that?
Are you guys governed by any type of in industry regulation?
Yes.
What's the requirement on that? Because that's the first thing, right? You have to abide by the law, and whatever requirements govern whatever it is that you do. So for like PCI, they'll say audit once a year. They'll say you have to do pen tests and vulnerability scans twice a year, and you have to do that. That's the very least you can do. So whatever organization or standards govern whatever it is you're doing, you have to first make sure you're doing that. And then that's kind of where the risk assessment comes in, right? And that's why I asked you, because if you have a proper risk assessment, you should be looking at your risks and ranking them, and then deciding, okay, which one am I going to remediate first, right? Based on order of importance, like what's going to cost me the most money, or whatever it is that determines your risk. Some companies it's money, some companies it's others, it might be something else. and then you remediate as such. And I would say at least once a year, you need to redo that risk assessment, because some high risks might become low, some low risks might become high. And so, you know, the attention that you're giving to your lower risk, right? It might not be a lot. You look at something that it turns out the impact is going to be minimal. So you decide you'll just accept the risk, and you know, won't even try to remediate it at all. You'll just accept it. But, you know, over time, the next 6 months, something shifts, and all of a sudden the impact for this thing, like probably 15 years ago, ransomware, you know, the impact would be great, but the probability that it would have occurred would probably be so minuscule that you would literally rank it as a, you know, low on your risk assessment, which means that's probably the last thing you're going to look at. Well, if you did a risk assessment, you know, 15 years ago, you haven't, you know, redone that risk assessment today, all of a sudden that low risk is now very high, and you need to pay attention to it, right? And you now need to invest in resources that will actually help you to to be able to mitigate that risk. So if you have that, that is what I would use as the driving force behind what you use to take action, right? And how often, you know, you do it, because it's just going to be different for everyone. So that's why I said, you know, based on whatever organizational standards govern what you do, use that as your baseline, and then you use your risks to determine how often you as an organization need to, whether it's bring auditors in, or, you know, go about implementing more security layers to make your business safer. Because at the end of the day, like you're saying, you don't want to implement something that costs you millions of dollars only to really be stopping, you know, a risk that would cost you, you know, thousands of dollars. You probably could accept that risk, right? So that would kind of be my advice on that.
So what if it's multiple? I mean, what's kind of the least common denominator? I mean, is it like quarterly or annually, or you know, because there are a lot of different. I mean, we're, you know, as an MSP, kind of more let's say more generalist kind of MSP. You know, it's not one particular thing that we're looking at. I mean, is there like, what would you, forgetting about the you know, particular industry requirements, what would you recommend as best practice outside of those industry requirements?
I would say now at least twice a year.
Makes sense.
Because
that's like minimum, right? And again, you have to decide the level of risk. You having access to all these different environments. What's the level of risk that poses? And so, again, case in point, right? Target got compromised because they had an MSP managing their HVAC system. All right. Well, how often was that MSP being audited? What was their protocol for making sure that their employees are getting security awareness training, that they have certain security protocols in place so that they don't get compromised, and then through them, Target gets compromised. So you being an MSP, those are things you have to consider as well.
Right. So Trisha says, is there a good AV you would recommend that can detect ransomware that's just monitoring, or do we need another security layer that detect that? Tori, you want to take a shot at this?
You know, again, Trisha, I think more and more companies are coming out with ransomware centric or ransomware focused malware, but I mean, at the end of the day, your best bet is going to be multiple layers. Like you know, like Justin was just saying a minute ago, these companies, these vendors are coming out saying they have a silver bullet for your malicious software woes, but the truth of the matter is there is no silver bullet. You know, CrowdStrike can be number one in the industry, but CrowdStrike by itself isn't enough. And so that's why you have to have multiple layers, looking at different aspects of your environment. And that's the best way to be able to detect the ransomware, especially if it's sitting there, you know, if it's sitting there monitoring. Again, it depends on how it's doing that, right? If it's running in memory, or you know, or it's however it's doing it, right? You have to have multiple solutions that are able to monitor and see, okay, well, there was some strange traffic that just left Trisha's machine and didn't do anything, but it still was kind of strange. Let me send an alert you know, and then now if anything, at least there's eyes on it, right? And then, you know, George or Justin or whoever can jump in there and start looking at you know, what's going on with your machine, and then hopefully detect it before it actually begins its attack. But again, it takes, your best bet is multiple layers. To depend on one solution is, you know, is going to set yourself up for failure.
So to answer your other question, Trisha, so part of the the challenge today with multiple layers is exactly what you're asking, right? There is no well-defined industry standard for any of this. It's all new, and everyone is coming out with their own technology. And so there is really no standard integration across the board, right? Where it's like, okay, Semantic will definitely work with, you know, another solution to help you to be able to see everything on a single pane of glass. And now it's just a pane, right? Because you have this solution over here, because, you know, you're creating defense in depth. So you have an endpoint protection solution over here. You have a, you know, network NDR solution over here, right? You have some other solution over here, and you have all these things going on. You got your Wi-Fi, you know, that you're monitoring. You have your physical devices that you're monitoring, like all of that. And everyone is claiming that they have the best technology. So it's like, you know, they want you to log into their portal and see their cool graphs and, you know, and whatnot. But then you gotta, you know, you have to kind of look at every single one of them. Unfortunately for us as, you know, business owners and individuals, we really don't have much of a choice. You know, so we just kind of have to put up with it for the time being. We are, however, seeing some instances now where there are some vendors kind of working together with the, you know, the bigger players in the various sectors, right? And they're allowing integration. So, you know, if you have a network detection threat hunting solution, they might be integrated with your endpoint solution. They're allowing that. But again, it tends to be from the big players in the industry. So, you know, if you're at a lower level like Norton, I don't think Norton is going to, you know, actually do that for you. And Total AV, how's that compared to Bitdefender? Tori, that's you. Trisha is asking, what are your thoughts on Total AV? How's that compared to, say, Bitdefender?
Yeah, when it comes to endpoint protection, I'm not very familiar with Total AV. Bitdefender is one of the bigger players. Kaspersky. You know, you have to look at the use case. So are we talking about, you know, us at home in a residential space? Are we talking about SOHOs, you know, solopreneurs? Or are we talking about enterprise grade endpoint protection? Because that changes the subject. You know, again, it's even for SOHOs, right? You have to look at what exactly are the SOHOs, you know, working with? Are they working with, you know, mission critical cardholder data, very sensitive data, or are they just connecting to SaaS-based products and just, you know, manipulating, you know, data and spreadsheets, whatever the case may be, updating CRMs, whatever the case may be, right? You know, I know a solopreneur that he runs his entire business off a spreadsheet. You know, this, you know, so it just really depends on, you know, what it is you're accessing, how big you are. You know, so from a SOHO / residential, you know, you might want to look at the Kasperskys, the Bitdefenders, the Semantics. Again, I'm not familiar with Total AV, but the concept's still the same. You still want to have layers. You still want to have defense in depth, no matter if it's just you or you're a 10,000 employee machine. You still want to have defense in depth. So, you know, one of the things that George and I try to stay away from is making recommendations, because again, you know, we don't want to plug companies, right, George? We don't want to plug companies, right?
That's right, man.
Okay, all right, just making sure, because I wasn't sure earlier. I wasn't sure if we were changing how we do things or not. So, but yeah, so, you know, and that's another thing you'll find out, Trisha, is that a lot of, you know, independent consultants will come in and they'll try not to make recommendations because they don't want to influence you, and then you go and choose that solution and it's a disaster for you, and then you know you go back and complain to the consultant. Well, you recommended. Well, you know, that's why we try not to recommend. We try to encourage you to go do your own research and make sure you understand what it is you're looking for your environment, because you may not need a CrowdStrike for what you do. That may be overkill, right?
One thing I'll say, Trisha, always bear in mind when it comes to traditional antivirus software, they all tend to be signature based, right? And what that means is they can only detect the known. So, you know, if there's a ransomware out there, like, you know, a specific flavor of, say, Petya, then, you know, they'll be able to detect that. However, it's really, really simple to, you know, get past signature-based detection, because signature-based detection is based on hashing. And all you have to do is change one bit in a file and the hash is different. You know, so there's always that. Is it better to not have, you know, a hash-based antivirus than no antivirus? No, it's better to have it. But, you know, I'm saying that just so you understand exactly what it is that you have when you have traditional AV. If it is that you're looking to create defense in depth, and you want to have, you know, endpoint protection or, you know, an endpoint response, then you'd have to look at something that's set up for that. Most of your traditional AVs just aren't, because the way the endpoint, you know, endpoint protection, endpoint response software work is nowadays they're using a lot of, you know, cloud processing. So they're using AI, you know, to help to detect patterns that you typically wouldn't be able to, you know, do previously without the technologies we have today. And they're all using, you know, massive teams behind the scenes that are trying to create these algorithms as the threats change, because they're constantly changing. You know, Story spoke about earlier, there's nation states using these things. And, you know, with ransomware as a service, right? It prevents outright war, because, you know, Russia didn't attack us. It's big beer from, you know, God knows where that attacked the US. And so, you know, you avoid all of that over there. So I'm saying that because it's big money, it's big business. So they're not just going to sit there idly while all these vendors come out with solutions that's supposed to be stopping them. They're always going to be, you know, thinking about how to get around it. So the new tech that we're seeing, they're trying to combat that by trying to figure out what they're doing as they're doing it, and then like modifying the behavior of their software in real time.
Cool.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. Anyone else has any questions? If not, I am going to give you all a candy.
A candy? For real?
Candy.
What kind of, what? No.
All righty.
Did he just quit? Because he'll do that. This guy. All right. Thank you for the invite. It was very informative. Okay. Thanks, Jillian and company. I do appreciate it. I'm happy that you guys found it very informative. Don't pay my partner any mind. He's like that.
I am like that. I'm that guy.
You want to be that guy? Yeah. Oh,
Dustin, I appreciate you again, man, coming through, moderating, trying to force me out of mute and starting my video. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet disconnected. I lost host ability there for a minute.
It's all good, man. It's been fun times. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you again for joining us, and go Cowboys.
No go, no Cowboys. Thanks, everyone.
Good.
Ciao.
Thanks, guys.
Later.